Hey, you guys, I'm sorry I had to move this back by an hour. I've not been feeling great, so I slept in a little bit and then just took some time to wake up. Plus, this is one of those topics that it's important we talk about it, whether we're Christians or not Christians. Why? Because the whole idea of prophecy is one that's loaded with all sorts of mayhem and dysfunction. And I'm not saying that you can't have the right prophets and prophecies, because I have had some that were actually right on the money. But my husband and I were just talking. We've also had a bunch that were just ridiculous. I think the most ridiculous one was they told him he was going to be a football blocker in the spiritual, and one that I was told that I would always be able to walk along the ocean of God's glory. I would always have access to the deepest levels of his glory. What does that even mean? So I have been looking at something, and I've got to shout out Fundy Snark on Reddit, because I would not have found this otherwise, because I've gotten to the point where I'm not really looking for a lot of this stuff. And I kind of wanted to talk about this because it also intersects with something that I talked about years and years, well, not years and years ago, back in 2019, I think it was, when Olive Heiligenthal died. She, if you didn't know who she was the toddler daughter of one of the worship team leaders at Bethel Redding in Redding, California. Now, Bethel Redding brags that they are death raising. They have death raising teams, and they can heal anything. I unfortunately butted heads, interacted, sat on their teachings at my old church, my old toxic church. And some of the things they taught were just really out there. The death raising was one of them. And it's not to say I didn't try my hand at that too, because I certainly did. I remember praying for my stepfather who's in the casket to live again, and various other times. And I used to be on the healing team with the old church too. So we were always praying for these serious situations. And some of the ministry people had gotten all the wrong end of the stick, I think, on some of these things. I remember praying every week for my friend that had MS. And every week, the healing team, hey, Kitty, the healing team would say, well, she's not getting her healing because she's got a dark spirit attached to her. So God's not going to heal her of her MS until she deals with her dark spirit. And then they would say, we have to pray that it doesn't get on us. And this came into play back when I was told I probably had MS, which it turns out I did not. I actually had nerve damage, and from something totally unrelated. And one of my old friends at Rack and Ford said, my old church said, gee, do you think it was the when we were praying for this friend? It's like, no, indeed. So you really have to be careful with healing prophecies and prophecies of raising people from the dead. Now, I realize that the Bible does say that we're going to do the same thing as Jesus and greater. And he did raise people from the dead. All of that. He raised people from the dead. He healed everybody that came to him for healing. So there is precedent. But I think we have to be not prideful about it, number one. And same thing with prophecy. I think if you're running around calling yourself a prophet and you're coming up with all these ideas about being a prophet, and you're showing up in your fancy clothing and your makeup, and you're bragging about you reached 27 million people, perhaps you're not the prophet you think you are, because you have clearly strayed into pride. So the lady I'm talking about this morning, and it's very similar to the Olive Heiligenthal story. I don't know how she pronounces her name, so I'm just going to pronounce it how it looks to me. Laire Lightner. Now, see, I have never run across Lori. I don't know who she is until I started doing some reading. Her son, her adult son, her young adult son, he had a tragic motorcycle accident. I don't know how long ago, a week, 2 weeks, somewhere in that time frame. And he experienced brain death. He was brain dead. They were having to keep him alive on machinery at the hospital. And a lot of times they will do that so that the family can come to terms with what's going on and be okay with it when they switch on the machinery, switch off the machinery, and go from there. That's not what's happened with Lori and her family. The self-described prophetess calls herself a lioness. Lori has gone to a really oddball place with this, straight out of Bethel, straight out of all kinds of these little weird non-denominational taco churches that I talk about. One of the things that's happened is she started calling for her son to walk out of the hospital bed. Now, I'm not saying that can't happen, because like I said, it says in the Bible, Jesus said we're to do what he does and greater. So I'm not discounting the possibility that this can happen. I'm just saying that it's not extremely likely to happen. And when you make it your entire message that you speak to God and you know God's heart and you know what God is saying all of the time, it can go in some weird places. And sure enough, it has gone into some extremely weird places in the last week and a half, 2 weeks since this happened. I went last night and I looked at this woman's Facebook, and it's really tragic. I feel for her. I feel horribly for her. Let me read you what she posted this morning. Having to plan my son's funeral in the natural while holding to my faith with zero wavering has been the hardest part of the entire journey. Absolutely. And my heart breaks for her. Losing a child is a horrible thing. We're not supposed to outlive our children. It's just not what happens in the natural. We expect to die first before our children. So she's been praying for him to come up out of the hospital bed, and eventually the hospital had to cut off life support. And she's been praying for him to be incredibly mentally ill. She needs professional help. Scotty, I was going to get to that. So she started praying that when he was taken for the, I don't know if they do autopsies on motorcycle victims. Most of the time it's a death that they don't exactly 100% understand everything that went wrong with it. There is an autopsy. So I'm guessing that he went off for an autopsy and then to the funeral home. So she's been praying that he would leave the medical examiner's office. He would leave the coroner, whatever they have in her area, which is Florida, so there's no telling. And she has been praying for this thing, him to come up out of the grave, basically. This is the same thing they did at Bethel when poor Olive died. But it was a little bit different. With Olive, they kept praying for her. And the state of California kept saying, hey, now, you only have 7 days to turn a body over for autopsy if there's been we can't figure out why somebody's died. We do an autopsy. You got to turn the child over. So they prayed for her the full 7 days before she finally had to go and they had to do all the stuff. Here's the thing. We're not Jesus. We're not. This is a fallen world. We're in the natural. To say without a shadow of doubt that God will bring somebody back from the dead is like you're saying, Scotty. It's not rational, okay? That's the kind of thing I was going to say, because I don't really want to call her incredibly mentally ill like you're doing, because it's kind of irresponsible for me to say it, because I don't really know for sure what's going on with her. But I do want to read through some of her timeline. This disaster has just been awful. And I've seen this so many times in my old church. Not to this extent, not to, we're going to pray that child out of the grave. I've never seen that in the natural. Literally, it's very tragic, and I feel terrible for the other children. Sure, their grief will be delayed as a result of this. Lily, exactly. When you don't face reality and you operate not in reality, you go and you believe these out there prophecies and things, you lose all sense of reality, scope, time, whatever. And when your grief hits you, because grief is merely delayed, you can't completely do away with it. When grief is delayed, especially by these kind of religious junk, I'm just going to call it junk because a lot of it is, it's useless. There is sometimes a terrible price to pay for delaying your grief. And the children are having to delay their grief. She posted a photograph on her timeline on Facebook when I started looking through this and watching this the last couple of days of her children outside, it looks like, and they're all drawing these huge signs, "Welcome home, Frankie," because the boy's name was Frankie. And they're all grinning and holding these huge signs they've made. She posted, "These babes," and then a weeping emoji. "Oh God, bless your people with a measure of their faith. 2 tears have been shed by them. The rest of the time has been nothing but faith declarations, fasting, and worship. God, thank you for these warriors who love you. My home was wrecked by Holy Spirit, and my kids were undone, and some were baptized by fire with the evidence of speaking in tongues. We are raising warriors." 2 weeks ago, I sent a message to David and told him the Lord has shown me that our children's ministry would start as, quote, children. Little did I know. Delusional much? It is. Lily, that is a heartbreaking picture because number one, the delayed grief. Number two, this is when you have children pulled into your own religious delusions, when you start pushing your ideas about what faith looks like, what God is like, on your children without giving them a space to explore what it is that they actually believe in. You do some harm. And I've seen that so many times in my old church with my friends. So many times the children are the ones that pay the ultimate price, particularly in these extreme isolationist families where there's lackadaisical homeschool going on. There may be a little bit of influence or addiction that mama has going on too, and all these things that are going on. And you look at this and you're like, just head desk, because you can't comprehend not living in that kind of reality. And while I do have the most compassion for her losing her son, which I cannot imagine. And she keeps posting stuff like Jesus is king. It's true, if you believe. And stuff like you're about to find out what biblical prophets can actually do. 2 Kings 2:23 through 25. Which, if you ask me, is a not very nice scripture to be posting towards anybody. It's all about Elisha getting jeered at, and as he walked along the road, some boys came out of town and jeered at him. "Get out of here, Baldy," they said. "Get out of here, Baldy." He turned around, looked at them, and called out a curse on them in the name of the Lord. Then 2 bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the boys. I can only guess that that is because she's getting jeered at left and right at places like Fundy Snark on Reddit. But I think even while people are saying this is delusional and not rational behavior, that people have the utmost sympathy, empathy for what she's going through with her son. with having to actually accept what the reality is, which we're not seeing any acceptance of that. She's just dragging her family through this more and more, and claiming that he is going to be resurrected. And she claims that this is just a plot of Satan. Says a pastor friend of David Hogan flew to the hospital and brought 2 of David's bandanas. As soon as I put one in my hand, fire literally burned from that bandana. He looked David and I square in the eyes and said, "You know what that means, right? Satan has called you out." Me, bring it the HE double hockey sticks on. And I'm not afraid to cuss, but I don't really like when YouTube spanks you on the wrist for using those kinds of words. So that's the only reason now I'm resorting to spelling some of this stuff. And seeing this happen over so many illnesses and so many different things in my old church, where people don't accept what's happened to them and they don't deal in rationality. What they do is they go off into magical thinking. And that's what we're seeing here with her, is this magical thinking that God is going to heal it all, and he's going to make everybody who's been mean to her. She's a very spiteful person. If she watches this, she won't have kind things to say about you. Scotty T. Pancakes, let me explain something. I should have explained this at the beginning of the video. My name is Suzanne Tidkemeyer. I wrote for Pathos for over 10 years, a column called No Longer Quivering, where I looked at all of the stupid, venial, petty, ridiculous, not biblical stuff that had to do with the quiverful church, okay? Quiverful, evangelical, non-denominational stuff. And you would not believe some of the harassment that I've had. So all I can say is bring it on. I do not respond to that crap in any way, shape, or form. Whether it's Steven Anderson's acolytes saying they're going to show up here in Costa Rica and shave my head, or it is Bethel Redding sending me oodles of emails and their people attacking me left and right. Bethel Redding is one of the reasons that I stopped doing No Longer Quivering, because I started looking at what was going on and said, you know, there is not enough money in this world that makes this type of harassment worth it. And I figured that, Scotty, because anytime you discuss these things, you have people that will get very, 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 very upset. And all I ever do is move them to Jerks for Jesus, where I can make fun of the worst of it. So let's look some more at her timeline. Do you have enough faith to lay hands on your, quote, dead son for 6 days, 12 hours a day with zero unbelief? That's next level wild faith. I pray the Lord raises your faith to that level. I pray that you never have to have your faith raised to that level, because this is one of those things that nobody should be going through. And if you're going through it, you hope that your friends and your family are around you supporting you, bringing you to a sense of rationality and to what the reality is. If you want to pray for him to be resurrected, fine, but don't make that the only thing that you got going on. Don't make that the only option, because everything that I've seen, we want to pray for what's part of God's plan, not this stuff, not this Bethel Death Racing Team stuff. You can mock all you want, but when hell shows up at your doorstep, you will be looking for people like David and I to fight on your behalf. When you've seen death itself and smiled because it has no power over the resurrected King, you aren't afraid of a single thing, not even Satan himself. I pray the day never comes for you, but if it does, we will ride at dawn. Well, this to me is the saddest and truly the most awful part yet. Abba, in 20 years of service, I have a track record with you of not asking you for anything. I just love and obey you. I'm calling in a favor for those 20 years. This is my withdrawal time. I want resurrection. You haven't told me to release my boy. So here I am again. Move on my behalf against the kingdom of darkness, crush it for your glory. If you grant my petition, I'll declare it publicly. Everything you ask of me is an immediate yes, wherever, whoever. I'll pick up serpents. I'll kiss lepers. I'll go to war with the kingdom of darkness itself. I promise you, I will spend the rest of my life to make your name known among the nations. You know my heart and my commitment to you. The one thing I ask, this one thing. And this one thing, this kind of teaching is just wrong and evil. It puts people in these do or die situations so many times when these sort of things happen. And what do you do when God doesn't answer? Cheapskate, you didn't miss much. I was just reading through the timeline of Laire Lightner. She lost her son to a motorcycle accident a couple of weeks ago, and she's praying for him to be resurrected. She was praying for him to walk out of the hospital. Now she's praying for him to be resurrected from the funeral home. And while there's nothing wrong with praying that way, there is something a little strange about it when you're not consulting God about what his will is. You're just saying, this is it. This is the same kind of teaching, like I said, Bethel teaches. And this is why I find Bethel so damn dangerous. They put you on these cliffs so that there's no backing down. This is what's going on. This is the way you're believing. And my question is, what happens when that doesn't happen? When your best laid plans don't work out, when all your prayers don't lead you to the place where you want to be? She's in beyond denial, cheapskate. I was looking through some of her prophecies and listening to her recently after seeing this on Fundy Stark and having my heart broken by it. And I have to talk a little bit about prophecy, because when you give prophecy, I mean, it talks about it in the Bible being for the edification of the body. It doesn't talk about it being personal, vengeful, any of those things. It's for building up, not tearing down. And when you start saying some of the things that I see a lot, not her, just her, so many of these self-described prophets start saying all this stuff, you're just smacking yourself in the head, doing the head desk thing and going, that is ridiculous. Like I said earlier, we've had oodles of prophecies given over us that were just oodles of stupid and wrong. The only one that I could really think that was given to us, well, it was given to me, that turned out to be right on the money, was I had this really weird dream and described it to a friend of mine who, quote, does dream interpretation. I was very cynical about that. But he gave me an interpretation, and I will be darned if it didn't play out exactly like he said. But here's the thing, it wasn't negative. It wasn't for personal gain. It wasn't any of those things. It was just, this means this and this means that. Unlike so many personal prophecies I've seen given through the years, including ones given to people who were clearly got one foot on the banana peel and the other on the tombstone. Some of that is just evil. And we used to have these huge healing ministry conferences, our old church. And again, I would see people come up all the time for chronic ailments, get prayer for it, declare that their chronic ailment was destroyed. It was taken on the cross by Jesus. Jesus died for them to be set free over ingrown toenails to cancer, so anywhere in between. And I'd see him a week and a half, 2 weeks later, say, how you doing, so-and-so? How you doing, Joe? Well, I got X, Y, and Z going on. I said, but didn't I hear you get up at the conference and say that you were completely healed? That is the horrible thing about all of this, because it exploits people. And anytime you have anything in non-denominational Christianity that is emotion provoking, that has excitement and expectation, where you've been wowed up by the crowd, to expect to see miracles, to expect to see people healed, to expect to see people come out of the grave. It's very easy to claim those things. And that's not to say that it doesn't sometimes happen. I've seen videos out of Africa where people were supposedly come out of the grave. Whoops, breaking my chair. So I'm always open to the possibility. I just don't think it's very, very likely. I've talked about this a lot on this channel. I have mastocytosis, mast cell disease, and I made myself a whole lot worse because my old church ordered me to ignore the symptoms, because the symptoms were just a lie Satan put upon me, that I was healed in the natural, that Jesus had taken this onto the cross. Well, that's all well and good, but when you keep having issues, and I mean significant issues, and you're being told, oh, well, to even acknowledge the symptoms is to bring glory to Satan. As just when you go into that territory, you have lost your mind. I'm just going to say it, and you end up in some strange places. This is the thing that I hold against these non-denominational churches. They're not grounded in reality. They teach all these weird things that aren't even taught in the Bible, or if they're taught, they're just barely touched upon, and they're making a huge thing out of the one little thing mentioned in there. Now, I'm thinking this lady is probably not connected to Bethel, but a lot of these teachings will come out of these places like Bethel and be co-opted by other ministries and go into some really strange places. So I'm done talking about this for now. Just any prophecies you hear, take them with an enormous boulder of salt. Anytime somebody tells you they can heal you with prayer or they can bring you out of the grave, take that with an enormous boulder of salt. Anytime anybody strays away from pretty much, I'm going to say, established biblical principles, you're in a place of strange fire at that point. That's all I'm going to say. I'm still trying to get myself together to be able to even edit my book. It's been a rough couple of months for me because of situations here with my house and other stuff happening. But I do plan on finishing it. And a lot of it deals with these exact kind of things that we're talking about and we're looking at. My heart breaks for this woman, this Laire Lightner. But at the same time, I'm afraid that when you delay accepting the reality or asking God his opinion, asking God to do his will in something, and to presume you know what his will is, you're in some very dangerous ground. And there's no speeding past grief. Either you deal with it as it pops up, or if you delay it, it just builds and builds and builds. And I pray that if God doesn't raise her son from the dead, that she ends up not being destroyed by the grief, because the grief will be enormous. And the same thing for those kids. I hope that those kids get the opportunity to have a grieving period. So heavy to not so heavy. I am excited, super excited. Yesterday, I started cleaning my sewing room and discovered a whole pile of winter clothing. I am so excited. I love very feminine clothing. I always have. I found all of my favorites that I used to wear in winter in Virginia. And since I'm going to Maryland for winter, guess what I'm wearing? So I am so happy about that. Sorry, you guys, I haven't been around much. I said I would be around on Thursday. We did our border run to Nicaragua, and I did okay with it till the very end. I started having a lot of problems because of overdoing it in the pool. And took me a couple days to recover from it, but I'm back now. I'm going to upload my review of the Righteous Gemstones later today, and I'll be back tomorrow for Taco Tuesday. I hope and pray that this family gets the help they need, because they definitely need it. It's a hard situation, losing a child. Laire Lightner, if you come after me because I say you're in denial, I am so sorry. I am so sorry you feel that way, but I hold nothing against you. I want you and your family to have the emotional healing that you deserve. Okay, you guys, I'm going to go.